Okay, everyone, so in the last lesson, we learned about the get method and the post method and how this works, this action form attribute that redirects us to the results.php. So in this next lesson, let's try to set up so that we will be able to make the operators work in our application here. And let's also combine some of the things that we've learned in the previous lessons. So at least we will be able to see a very simple project output that will be displaying in our results.php. Let's set up some simple styling and aesthetics for our output for the computation that we'll be doing when we try to input number 1 and number 2 values here, and we specify the use of a specific operator. So this one, we won't be using that. I just wanted to demonstrate here how a custom function will be working. And let's just go and try to set up some markup in our results.php. Let's just say that this is going to be simple PHP calculator output or results, just so that we'll have some title that we'll be seeing. And in here, we also want to have, of course, we can incorporate here the things that we've learned in the previous lessons, like the include method. But for now, let's just have some setup here, very simple. And I'm just going to have a div with the class name CSS result. And then inside of the div, I want to have an h2 that will have a PHP calculator output. And in here, we want to have a PHP tag that will contain all of the logic of our application. So things that we might want to accomplish is we want to check if the form is submitted. So we'll be doing some we will be using some super global variables in the PHP language. We'll talk more about that later on. So based on the pseudocode that we'll be doing here, we would want to also, of course, get the user input. Then we want to have some sort of a validation, like we would want to validate the input for numeric values. And then we also want to, of course, perform the calculation based on the selected operator. So we'll have the selection of the operators. And we want for the division operator, when we select that, we also want to go and have some sort of a, let's say, I'm just going to say here, a special consideration for the division operator. We want to go and check for division by 0. Okay, so let me just Alt Z that so that we can wrap the text. And of course, we also want to have some sort of a way for us to be able to display the result on the browser. So this is our target goal, line by line instructions that we would want to accomplish. So once we calculate, click on the calculate, we want to check if the form gets to be submitted. We want to get the user input values. Then we'll have some sort of a validation for the numeric values. And if you remember, we did do some things here for us to check for the number strings. We are using this is numeric. So we'll try to combine what we have so far learned in the previous lessons. And we will also be using some conditional statements for us to be able to work on some of the calculation based on the selected operator. And of course, we'll have a special consideration for the division operator for us to be able to check for division by 0. And then afterwards, we want to display the result on the browser. So before we go and try to work on this, let's just first try to set up the output for our CSS result class that we just created. So at least we'll have some sort of a display on the UI, just a simple UI. And of course, you can always try to improve on this. So I'm just going to use absolute here. Then let's have again one of the techniques for centering a div. So let me just type this as quickly as possible. So let's have translate. And I'm typing it from scratch so that you can try to follow along. And you can try to pause the video from time to time just for you to catch up. So at least you really get your hands dirty in coding. So let's have the background color. So let's just go and get the back shadow and text shadow here. And let's also have the border style and the border radius at the bottom here. So once we go here, we now have some sort of a PHP calculator output that will be displayed on the browser. So now let's go back here. I would suggest you pause the video first, try to figure out on your own how you will be able to implement the following here, and then just resume so that we can see how this will be done in my own implementation. So there are a number of ways on how you can implement this. So don't worry if we're not going to be exactly the same. So at least you can try out figuring out the logic of what we want to accomplish in this simple PHP calculator results. So just pause the video for a while and just play it again, and when you have already tried working on figuring out how we can try to display this or how we can try to accomplish the following instructions that we have set up here in our PHP calculator output results.php. So now let's start to go and work on each of this. If you're done, let's start to work on trying to figure this out. So if you want to check the form, if it got submitted, let's start to set up here some global variables for the server. We'll be using the request method, and we will be checking if it's a post method. Then let's have all of this inside of our if statement here. Let's just go and have a bit of indentation. Let me just select all of this for easier indentation. So this is the first thing that we would want to check if the post method. So this is a global variable. So let's talk about that later on. Then let's first try to work on each one of this. Then let's try to work on discussing it much further. So we want to check for the user input. So let's have some variables that we will be declaring here, like the num1. And we're going to be using this super global variable. And we're going to access the num1. Let's have our operator assign the value of post, and we'll be using the operator. Then let's have num2 assign the value of post. And I'm hoping you're getting the idea where we are getting these variable declarations. If we go back here, we do have that some labels that we set up for our operator, for our input elements, and our labels. And now we want to check here if is numeric. If it is not numeric, num1, or not is numeric, num2, then we want to have an if statement that will echo error that says, so we're validating if the input that the user is going to be placing or will be typing will be a valid number. So let's please enter valid numeric values. So here we are checking for the validation of the numeric values, and we want to have an else statement that will be performing or checking if we are performing calculation based on the selected operator. So here we can use the switch statement that we have utilized in the previous lessons. So let's have a case that will contain the plus operator, and then let's have a result variable, and we're checking if num1 is plus num2. And let's have a break, and let's have another case, and that will be for the subtraction operator. Then let's go and have that. Of course, we want to check the logic here, and we want to use the subtraction and another break. We have another case statement that will contain the multiplication operator, arithmetic operator, and of course we'll have to make sure that this is correct. We're using the correct arithmetic operators here. Now in our logic, we would want to have some sort of a special consideration for the division operator, right? So we can try to put here in our case for our division operator. In here, we would want to have another if statement. Let me just set that up first. And inside of the if statement, we can check if num2 is equal to 0. Then we can have an echo here that says that error, division by 0 is not allowed. And let's close that paragraph tag. And then let's have, and we can see here the nesting of conditional statements. And we can have here in the if statement, we'll have the break. And then we'll be having this result value afterwards. And then we'll use the division operator. Then let's have another break. And we also want to have a default here just in case. We know that we can have a default value if ever, just copy this, echo, and this error here will be saying we have an invalid operator. Invalid operator selected. And let's have a default value with a break statement. Then, lastly, we will have here the display on the browser, and we'll be using this ESET. And you will see it's giving us some sort of intelligence here. And ESET is a function that will be determining if a variable is declared and is different than null. So let's have this result. And let's go and have an echo here that will be printing out result. And we want to get that result variable printed out on the browser. So if we did this correctly, we should now be able to do some calculations in our PHP calculator on the browser. So let me just also close this with a HTML tag here. And let's refresh this. And if we say 5 plus 10 and calculate, fatal error. Array callback must have exactly 2 elements in. So we do see an array callback must have exactly 2 elements. Line 14. Let me just double check. Line 14. And this is perfectly normal if you're looking into some code base. It's important that you get to try to figure out possible problems that you may have encountered. Oh, I think that's because it's saying here it's an array callback. And we know that if we do a quick search, this is a mistake on my end. I maximized the use of the wrong operator for our global variable here. So when I say global variables, this is just meaning that these are going to be always accessible regardless of the scope, because we have what we call global scope, function scope, code block scope when it comes to some use cases of utilizing some variables. Just have that in mind. So, and when you say global, super globals, this can be accessed from any functions, class, or file without having to do anything special. So this should now work. If I try to refresh this, we see that there's this. Let's just go and let me just see here. Okay, so we're not seeing the output, and I think that's because we placed our if statement out of our else statement. So we want that to be here. And so the nesting is also important. Just be careful when it comes to nesting your if else statements. So we have an if statement, and there's actually a way for you to view that. And we have another if statement here, and we have an else statement that performs a switch condition, and then we have another if statement. So if we try to refresh this, let's try to refresh the browser and calculate. So we still can't see the output yet, and I think I know the reason for that. I actually paused the video, and I think I forgot to replace this method with a post. So it's very, very important that you try to refresh, and we do get that result 15. So it's important that because we are doing some checking for the form if it is submitted with the server global super global variable, and this is the information that is usually we passed into the array invocation operator. Usually this will be holding information about headers, paths, and script locations. And specifically right now we are passing in the request method, which is again, this is a built-in variable, super global variable in the PHP language. So if you try to search $_server And in this request method, you will find on the internet that this is a request method that will be returning the request method used to access a page such as a post request. And that's where we're having an issue with the result not being outputted. So let's first do some testing. Let me just go back here. Let's say I want to have 2 multiply or minus 1 and calculate that. We should get the result of 1. So we're getting the correct result. And usually we would want to have some sort of a way to test things out. 10 multiplied by 2. Let's say I'm just going to use multiplication here. We do get that 20. And that's correctly being displayed. How about 10 divided by 5? And if we calculate that, we do get 2. What if we do that validation for division? So we're checking for an error if the division by 0, if we are dividing the second number, or if num2 is going to be equal to 0. So if the first number is being divided to 0, we should get that error division by 0 is not allowed. So that's working correctly. And so I think the application is working correctly right now. So if we go back to some of the things that we wrote here, let's just go and read through them. So in here, we're using an if statement. Let's end this. End of if statement that checks for form submission. This one is going to be end of if statement for if else statement. And in here, end of set if result if statement. So when there are nesting of if statements, it's really recommended that you have some sort of a comment, as I mentioned in the previous lessons. In that way, it will be easy for you to look into your code base. And here we do know that this is going to be for the switch statement and of switch statement. So if we look into here, we have the super global server variable. We're accessing the request method. So this is going to be checking if the form has been submitted via the post method. That's why we were having an issue earlier, because we were using a get method instead of a post method. Then inside of this if statement, we are trying to access in here we have a conditional block. Okay, so the conditional block that will have most of the instructions that we will need for us to accomplish our goal of the logic of our application. And we want to retrieve the user inputted values from the form. That's why we declared a variable, and we're using this super global variable post. And we did talk about the post method, how that works, especially for security. It's a way for us to send variables via the post method. And in here, we do have the post method, or the post global variable, super global variable. We're passing in the num1, so that whatever information that the user input in the input element that has a name num1 will be stored in this num1 variable. Then the operator, so we do see that that 10 value is going to be stored here in num1. And this post super global variable, again, these are built-in variables in the PHP language. This one is a custom function that we use so that we can store the selected operator. And here we have the user input for num2, which is going to be the value that we, as the user, put in our second input element. Then we're checking for validation for the numeric values. If it is not a numeric value, let's say I'm going to say 10 here, and this is going to be 20, and we know that this is not going to be numeric values. So we do get that error, please enter valid numeric values, and we're getting that echo there. And even if we just say that this is going to be a numeric value, but one of them is not correct, we will still get that error. Okay, so we did tackle the logical operator or, that says if this is not true, or if this is not true. So let's say I'm going to put here 1, and this one's going to be 0. We should still be getting that output. Please enter valid numeric values. So if these are true, we know that they are numeric values. We will then proceed to our switch statement that will be checking for the switch operator if we are able to go and store the values of num1 and plus num2. So if I say 1 plus 1, we should be able to get 2. And if we use the operator subtraction, 10 minus 1, we should be getting 9. And then if we are going to be using the multiplication, 10 multiplied by 2, we should get 20. And here, if we divide by 2, we should get 5. And we also added here check for division by 0. So we do have that error that's working. And we do have a default value if we selected a incorrect operator. And we do have this eset method, which is, or eset function, that will be checking if this result variable is going to be determining, or this eset function is going to be determining if a variable is declared and is different than null. Okay, just have that in mind. That's usually one of the that is the use case of the eset function, built-in function in the PHP language. So I hope that that gave us an idea on how we can try to display the result here using the eset function that is just going to be allowing us to check if the variable is set and is not null. And I just want to show you here, because we do have a validation check here, or this error, invalid operator selected. So we can actually add another option here for the percentage, for example. And let's try to refresh that, and let's go back here. Let's just refresh. And let's have that modulus operator, or the percentage calculator, in our calculator application. And we do see having that invalid operator selected, that we just added just for testing this default echo for an invalid operation for our arithmetic operators here. And I think that's it. So I hope you got the idea, and we did encounter some debugging, and I'm hoping you also figured out if ever you did encounter some bugs. And that's perfectly normal when it comes to coding. Sometimes you really need to just figure out what you're missing. And of course, the first step is to do some research, read some documentation, then try to also maximize reading your code base. It's really important that you try to double check things. So we did make a mistake here. I personally made the mistake with the post method. That's why it was not producing the output that we are expecting it to produce. We do have different types of errors that you might encounter. Sometimes it can be a syntax error, a simple mistake with the semicolon. It can be a runtime environment error or a logic error. Let's say, for example, we have this logical errors that we wanted to multiply, but instead of having a plus sign here, we placed a multiplication operator. So most probably, if we calculate this and try to refresh and calculate that, we're getting a 50, but it's still running. We're not seeing any syntax or runtime environment error. So there's that logical error that we're encountering, mainly because of us making a mistake with the logic of what we want to accomplish in our application. So I hope you got the idea, and this course series, or this video series, gave you some ideas on how to get the ball rolling with the PHP language. And there are still a lot of things to learn in PHP. We still have that object-oriented PHP programming concept, and I'm hoping that through the lessons that we have covered in this video series, you learned a lot, and that this will be getting the ball rolling for you in further deepening your knowledge when it comes to the use of the PHP language. So that's it for this lesson, and if you do have some questions, feel free to comment down in our comment section for questions and answers for good discussions. And I do have a server. If you want, we can try to learn together further, and I'll be leaving a link to that Discord server for community discussion. I've just created a server for our discussions about the topics that we have so far covered in this video series. So that's it for this video series. Thank you everyone for staying with me up to this point, and I hope you learned some valuable lessons that you can try to incorporate into further deepening your knowledge in the PHP language. So thank you, and stay safe.